Friends, English Literature, Introduction to Drama, The Lion and the Jewel by Ol Shrinka. Brief questions with answers. Brief questions 101 to 150. Question 101. Who is the invisible girl singing in the bush? Answer. CD is the invisible girl singing in the bush. Question 102. What does CD do when Lekunil falls into a stream? Answer. When Lekunil falls into a stream, CD bursts into laughter and appears on the stage, partially covering her with a piece of cloth. Question 103. How does Lekunil get back? Answer. He gets back trying to wring out of the water from his clothes. Question 104. Who take Lekunil in front of the Odin tree against his wishes? Answer. The villagers take Lekunil in front of the Odin tree against his wishes. Question 105. When does Baroka enter the scene? Answer. When the villagers take Lekunil in front of the Odin tree against his wishes, Baroka, the Bill, enters the scene with his attendants from behind the tree. Question 106. What does Lekunil do when Baroka enters the scene? Answer. When Baroka enters the scene, all greets him except Lekunil, who tries to go away but is forced to stop. Question 107. When does Lekunil bid Baroka good morning? Answer. When Baroka enters, all greets him except Lekunil, who tries to go away but he is forced to stop. Lekunil then bows to show respect for the bill and bids him good morning. Question 108. Why does Baroka feel insulted? Answer. Baroka feels insulted as Lekunil tries to go away without greeting him. Question 109. Why does Baroka order his commandants to siege Lekunil? Answer. Baroka feels insulted as Lekunil tries to go away without greeting him, so he orders his attendants to siege Lekunil on the charge of trying to steal the virginity of the village girls by taking part in the dance with them. Question 110. Who demand Lekunil's blood? Answer. The villagers demand his Lekunil's blood. Question 111. Why do the villagers demand Lekunil's blood? Answer. The villagers demand Lekunil's blood as he is charged with trying to steal the virginity of the village girls by taking part in the dance with them. Question 112. What do the villagers do on the Baroka's orders? Answer. On the Bill's orders, they throw Lekunil down prostrate. Question 113. When does Baroka feel sympathy for Lekunil? Answer. On the Bill's orders, they throw him down prostrate. Baroka then feels sympathy for Lekunil's plight. Question 114. What does Baroka do when he feels sympathy for Lekunil? Answer. He pacifies the villagers, orders dry clothes for him, and orders to hold a feast in his honor. Question 115. What does Lekunil do at the party? Answer. At the party, Lekunil's attention is fixed on CD and takes a number of photographs of her to be published in the magazine. Question 116. When does the mime in mourning end? Answer. The mime ends when Lekunil rushes out of the party with his hand on his mouth. Question 117. Who is Ruth? Answer. Ruth is a biblical character. She was married to a Jew in Moab. After the death of her first husband, she married Boaz and went gleaning among his field away from her own home. She often felt sad and longed to return to her own home. Question 118. Who was Rachel? Answer. Rachel was the second daughter of Laban. Jacob fell in love with her and agreed to work 7 years for Laban in return for her hand in marriage. Question 119. Who is Esther? Answer. Esther was an orphan who was brought up by her older cousin Mordecai. She shaped Jewish people, gaining an influential position as the consort of Xerxes I. Question 120. Who is Bathsheba? Answer. Bathsheba was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, but was seduced by David. Her beauty brought death to her husband. Question 121. Whom does Barakah send to Sidi with a proposal of marriage? Answer. Barakah sends his head wife, Sadiko, to Sidi with a proposal of marriage. Question 122. What message does Sadiko convey to Sidi? Answer. Sadiko conveys the message to Sidi that the Barakah wants to marry her. Question 123. On what grounds does Sidi reject the marriage proposal from Barakah? Answer. Sidi rejects the proposal on the grounds that Barakah is too old for her. Question 124. How does Sadiko encourage Sidi to accept the proposal? Answer. Sadiko encourages her to accept the offer by presenting before her a rosy picture of life as Barakah's last wife and as the first head wife of his successor. Question 125. Why, according to Sidi, does Barakah want to marry her? Answer. Sidi thinks that being jealous of her beauty, Barakah wants to possess her as his personal property. To Sidi, Barakah wants to marry her to seek a new fame by possessing the jewel city of Illuginle. Question 126. What is Popinje? Answer. It is a sort of parrot. Question 127. Whom does Sadiko call Popinje? Answer. Sadiko calls Lekundal Popinje. Question 128. Why does Sadiko call Lekundal Popinje? Answer. Sadiko calls him Popinje to term him as a conceited person. Question 129. How does Sidi compare her own image to that of Barakah? Answer. She compares her own image to that of Barakah, like the dew moistened lips, water glistens on her face, but Barakah's face is like a torn feather piece. His goat-like turf is like scattered twists of grass. She is young and full of youthfulness, while Barakah's life has been spent. Question 130. How is the skin of Sidi? Answer. She has smooth velvet skin. Question 131. Why does Sidi compare herself with the twinkle of a jewel and Barakah with the back part of a lion? Answer. Because of her youthfulness and beauty, she compares herself with the twinkle of a jewel and Barakah with the back part of a lion with 4 legs. Thus, she points out the differences of ages between them. Question 132. Who is Sango? Answer. Sango is the god of lightning whose anger is sudden and terrible. Question 133. What is Harmattan? Answer. It refers to the dry cold wind from the north which brings heavy dews and haziness to the morning of November, December, and January. Question 134. What does Sadiko do being failed to convince Sidi to marry Barakah? Answer. Being failed to convince Sidi to marry Barakah, Sadiko invites her to supper with him that night. Question 135. Why does Barakah arrange a feast in Sidi's honor? Answer. Sadiko tells Sidi that Barakah wants to arrange a small feast in her honor as she has brought great fame to the people of the village of Illuginle after printing her photographs in a Lagos magazine. Actually, Barakah is jealous and pretends to be proud of her fame. Question 136. What is the real motive of Baroka behind his invitation? Answer. Baroka is jealous of Sidi. His real motive is to have her. Question 137. On what grounds does Sidi refuse, turn down the invitation? Answer. She turns down the invitation on the grounds that every woman who has eaten supper with him one night becomes his wife or concubine the next night. Question 138. Where is the mime of the White Surveyor staged? Answer. The mime of the White Surveyor is staged in the second episode, Noon, in The Lion and the Jewel. Question 139. What does the mime of the White Surveyor expose? Answer. It exposes Baroka as a die-hard rogue. Question 140. What is a die-hard rogue? Answer. It is a person who opposes change and refuses to accept new ideas. Question 141. What does the mime of the White Surveyor show? Answer. The mime shows how Baroka foils the building of railway through illusionly. Question 142. How does the mime of the White Surveyor begin? Answer. It begins with the arrival of the prisoners guarded by two warders in a dense forest. Question 143. Why are the prisoners brought? Answer. The prisoners are brought to do the hard task of breaking the jungle. Question 144. By whom is the party headed? Answer. The party is headed by a white surveyor in khaki helmet. Question 145. What does the foreman do when the white surveyor examines the map? Answer. When he examines the map, the foreman erects an umbrella over him. Question 146. When does the white surveyor order the prisoners to start their work? Answer. Consulting the map, he orders the prisoners to start their work. Question 147. How do the prisoners work? Answer. They cut down trees and drag logs while singing in chorus. Question 148. When does Baroka's henchman enter the scene? Answer. When the prisoners begin to lay rail tracks, Baroka's henchman, Wrestler, enters the scene to assess the situation. Question 149. Why does Baroka's henchman flee? I repeat the question. Why does Baroka's henchman flee? Answer. When the prisoners begin to lay rail tracks, Baroka's henchman, Wrestler, enters the scene to assess the situation. Being horrified at the sight, he flees and returns with Baroka himself. Question 150. When do Baroka and his henchmen disappear from the scene? Answer. When the prisoners are laying rail tracks, Baroka and his henchmen enter the scene. They assess the situation and then disappear. Thank you friends for watching my video.